This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Yeah, here we go.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dream Idiots. I'm Morris, and the tall, silent fella across the way there is Bryan. Each week we come to you with stories that we tell each other and bring you along for the larfs. Bryan, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. We actually had a touch of fall here, believe it or not. It was a nice, cool morning here in mid-August in Colorado. So
I'm
that
jealous.
means it will be snowing soon. You
Excellent.
can find all kinds of stuff for us at dreamidiots.com. We still have t-shirts, Bryan, and we still have mugs you can pick up, all kinds of stuff. Thank you for listening and sending in your reviews on whatever platform you're listening on. We do appreciate it. We appreciate hearing from you. Thanks for sending us your emails and your ideas for stories and your responses to our assignments, such as tracking down songs that were turned into movies that you remember, and maybe your stories of urban legends you remember hearing when you were a gullible young person or a gullible old person in some cases.
Yes, absolutely. You can check us out. As he said, dreamidiots.com, and we are at Dream Idiots on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to reach out and say hello with any suggestions or feedback, the email is dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com.
And it is episode 78. I get to go first today. And Bryan, we are going to talk about Mondegreens.
Mondegreens. No idea.
Do you know what Mondegreens are? Okay.
No clue.
A Mondegreen is a word or phrase that results from a mishearing. You've misheard something, especially when the word or phrase is sung or recited.
Huh.
The example most often given comes from Jimi Hendrix's lyric from Purple Haze. Excuse me while I kiss the sky is often misinterpreted as excuse me while I kiss this guy.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, as a kid, I misheard the lyrics to Lucille. You might recall that I mentioned Lucille. It's a Kenny Rogers song. Mentioned it back in episode 75, Movies Off the Radio. The proper lyrics are, you picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille, 4 hungry children and a crop in the field. Now, when I was little, I heard this as, you picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille, 400 children and a crop in the field. And even as a kid, I realized, I think I know why Lucille left, because of the 400 children.
Too many mouths to feed.
Too many mouths to feed. Then later on, the creepy stalking tune, Every Breath You Take by The Police, has these lines. Oh, can't you see you belong to me? My poor heart aches with every breath you take. Now, I was a teenager when this song came out, and I heard, oh, can't you see you belong to me? I'm a pool hall ace with every breath you take.
Also
did
good.
Did you have any of these that you recall?
Oh, I'm sure I did, because I mean, we all did, and I mean, as a young kid, when I had inherited some number of LPs, in those days you could actually reasonably expect to have the lyrics of songs. But I mean, I'm sure to this day there are tons of songs that are favorites of mine that I sort of sing phonetically, and I don't really know what the words are. But I can't think of a good example of that now.
Well, we'll probably come across a few. Now, Maria Konnikova, you might have heard her name. She's appeared on several podcasts. She does social science. She does all kinds of science. She's written a book called The Confidence Game, all about how con men operate. She's become a professional poker player. She's written a book on that. And an excellent article from The New Yorker. She explains where the term Mondegreen comes from and how they happen, which is the interesting thing to me, because originally I wanted to just talk about Mondegreens I've heard, Mondegreens I've committed. But when I started reading her article, I remember this is actually extremely fascinating. Now, where the term originated is this. In a 1954 Harper's article, Sylvia Wright coined this term in her reflection on a poetry collection that was often read to her as a child by her mother. Now, this book, Bryan, I'm sure you have this book. It was written by Thomas Percy. It was his collection. 1765 was the publication date. Relics of Ancient English Poetry.
Mhm.
And relics is spelled Reliqueus. I'm sure you have it squunched between Britney Spears lyrics and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Mhm.
Relics of Ancient English Poetry. And the poem in question was a Scottish ballad titled The Bonny Earl of O'Moray, and that is O apostrophe Moray. The Bonny Earl of O'Moray. The final stanza of which young Sylvia always heard as this: Ye Highlands and ye Lowlands, oh, where ha ye been? They ha slain the Earl of Moray and Lady Mondegreen. Lady Mondegreen.
Mm-hmm.
The stanza is actually, Ye Highlands and ye Lowlands, oh, where ha ye been? They ha slain the Earl of Moray and laid him on the green. Like laid him on the village green because he's dead.
Right.
Wright wrote, which I really didn't read out loud before I wrote that particular sentence. Wright wrote, the point about what I shall hereafter call Mondegreens, since no one else has thought up a word for them, is that they are better than the original.
Oh, okay. Nice. Okay.
So Lady Mondegreen laid him on the green gives us the term Mondegreen. And then Maria Konnikova goes on to explain and give some reasons why these things happen when we mishear these words. The first is pretty obvious. When we teach basic communication, we teach that the old sender message receiver model of communication. There's a sender wants to say something to someone, they send along a message, and we know that every communications pathway is hampered at some point by noise, some type of noise. But the lack of visual cues seems to be a particular problem. Speech itself in song and poetry can have unusual stress and structure plus accent. The Rolling Stones were generally a problem for me in this regard, so it's no surprise that the Rolling Stones are in fact responsible for 91% of all known Mondegreens for the population at large. And that's a joke, but seriously, there's a lot of Rolling Stone lyrics that to this day I cannot figure out unless I'm looking at a lyric sheet, simply because of the way the song is structured, because of Mick,
the cadence,
cadence, and there's a scene in a Whoopi Goldberg movie where she's trying to decipher the lyrics, and she's like, she just finally gives up, says, "What the hell are you trying to say, Mick?" But there's noise of various kinds. The noise can be physical noise, interference with the message, static. It could be semantic noise, like if you don't speak the same language. It could be any number of noise. But one of the things she talks about that's most interesting to me is the idea of an oronym, Oronyms, an oronym. These occur when phonetic sounds and groupings can be broken up logically in a number of ways. This can be particularly challenging for those who speak English as a second language. And Maria gives a couple of examples in her article, and I'm going to throw some of those out there, and I've got a couple of my own. I have a poster for a Foghorn Leghorn movie. You know Foghorn. You know him intimately, actually. For those of you who don't, he's the giant loudmouth schnook of a rooster from Looney Tunes cartoons. And the title of the movie that I've got, the movie poster I've got, is Pullet Surprise. Pullet, Surprise. Right. And it's an oronym of the prestigious award, the Pulitzer Prize, named after Joseph Pulitzer. So Pulitzer Prize replaces Pulitzer Prize, and you have to listen very carefully to determine between the two. Another example, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody becomes Bohemian Rap City. Two different words, rap and city. And this is perhaps my favorite. Meteorologist, that is the folks who tell us the weather and study weather, becomes a meteorologist. Another example that Konnikova gives, all of the other reindeer in the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer becomes Olive, the other reindeer. So we attribute all of the mischief and meanness that the other reindeer have, Donder and Blitzen and Vixen and Comet and Cupid, in this one little shithead Olive, the other reindeer. And here's my contribution that goes the other direction. Is the Cuban folk song Guantanamera? You know the song, right?
Yeah.
Guantanamera. Okay. I have actually heard English speakers, and I think this was maybe like in a church youth group night. English speakers sing this song as 1 ton tomato.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, 1 ton tomato, 1 ton tomato. Or I've actually heard this too. Feliz Navidad in the wrong voice becomes please eat my snot.
Oh.
And I've heard kids sing that before as well.
Yeah, because that's what you do around the holidays.
Right. I have no idea what has to do with holidays. But both of those are examples of it going the other way. When an English speaker hears a Spanish term and phonetically they're hearing something totally different. Now, the please eat my snot example is probably just a childhood friend who was being an asshole. But
Right.
1 ton tomato is kind of believable. 1 ton tomato, 1 ton tomato. It's kind of believable. Now, another reason she gives that perception of the sound itself is a problem. And she calls this the McGurk effect. That's McGurk, the McGurk effect. There's an excellent video on this. If you look up the McGurk effect video online, it has to do with the consonant ba, B-A, and fa, F-A. Where if you say ba, like you're saying ba with your mouth, you can say them both differently.
Right.
The way you perceive what the person is saying is going to influence what you hear.
Sure.
So another thing with the McGurk effect is this Creedence Clearwater line. You probably know what's coming up. There's a bathroom on the right versus there's a bad moon on the rise is an example of the McGurk effect.
Right.
Which, again, that's another one I've actually heard people say, oh, no, that's what they're saying. There's a bathroom on the right. And I was like, what do you think this song is about? Is it about a road trip where you really have to pee? But my Lucille example from above, 4 hungry children versus 400 children, is an example of the McGurk effect, where I'm hearing 400 versus 4 hungry. Right? But to my credit, I think 4 hungry versus 400 is a little bit more understandable than bathroom on the right versus bad moon on the rise.
Right.
I think. Another reason is the cohort model. And this to me is the most fascinating. You mishear something because the word activates other concepts associated with that word. For example, looking back to Jimi Hendrix and Purple Haze, you're more likely to kiss a guy than you are the sky. So when you make that connection between kissing something, it makes more sense to kiss a person than to just kiss the sky.
Right. Okay.
Right. So
hard to wrap your brain around the concept, and so your brain just kind of makes an assumption.
Right. Another example she gives is that if you hear the word row, you're going to hear it very differently if you're on the rowing team for college versus if you're a chef.
Right.
If you hear the word row, you think row, the coxswain, the calling the row structure. If you hear row as a chef, you're thinking caviar because of the words you associate with that phonetic combination of R-O and then whatever words come between. So with my example of every breath you take from earlier, I heard pool hall ace because of poor heart aches. Beside the obvious thing a teenage boy would be doing while listening to music, guess what I could often be found doing while listening to music? You were over at my house a lot in high school.
Playing pool?
Shooting pool. We instead of a nice living room, we had a pool table in front. Right. I spent a lot of time shooting pool. We had a boombox in the corner, and I often had tapes stacked up on it, and one of them was the Police's Synchronicity album, of which Every Breath You Take was a part. So I am literally shooting pool, hearing I'm a pool hall ace because, hey, man, I really wanted to be a pool hall ace. So it's not some kind of metaphoric pool cue thing that's going on. I'm associating that song I'm mishearing with something I'm doing at the time.
Right.
Okay. So, finally, a last little bit with this article from Konnikova. Instances where, and again, I've got 3 of hers and one I threw at the end, one we've talked about before. instances where the Mondegreen becomes the preferred term over the original.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got two. But here's three that she talks about. Spitting image is actually a Mondegreen. It originated in the 19th century, and the original phrase was spit and image. Spit meant likeness. You are the very likeness and image of your father. And slowly over time, and became ing. So it became spitting image, which is now what we use.
Right, sure.
A naranj, a Persian Sanskrit phrase for fruit, became an orange. That's where we get the term orange from for our citrus fruit. And a naranj, an orange. An nickname from Old
Nickname,
English
right.
becomes a nickname. That's right. The two examples I've got, we've talked about this one before. How are you doing? I'm fair to middling. Now in Texas,
Midlands,
a lot of people say fair to Midland because
Right.
Midland is a town out in West Texas.
Right.
And then finally, one that I just thought of is, and I don't know if this counts as a Mondegreen or not, but I am seeing more often and more often replacing the word supposedly with
I know what you're gonna say.
Supposedly.
And that drives me up the friggin' wall. I hate that so friggin' much. So I mean, common usage for all I know now, it's actually in the dictionary. But I've known several people that would commonly use supposedly. Like, that's not a friggin' no supposed. Look, supposedly, you know, you changing the D to the B. No, I'm sorry. You're if you do that, you're a dumbass.
So,
but it may not be acceptable to use that because it's so common.
Yeah, I don't know if it counts as a Mondegreens or not, or maybe one day down the road, maybe it will be. But I want to close out with three other examples in my final little bit. I'm calling other Mondegreens I have known. I consulted with some folks on Mondegreens. My wife and one of my sons didn't respond. They couldn't think of any, but my brother kicked in this example. He was visiting this last weekend. My brother Trenton said he often misheard a Third Eye Blind song, Semi-Charmed Kind of Life.
Uh-huh.
You know that song?
Yeah, sure.
Semi-Charmed Kind of Life. As Summertime 9 to 5. Which, you know, he didn't know the name of the song, but I would argue that those are as good as lyrics as the original in the spirit of Sylvia Wright's original definition of the Mondegreen, that is better than what went before. Summertime 9 to 5. I can hear it rather than Semi-Charmed Kind of Life. When my eldest son was very young, he would search through a music collection until he found a compact disc, Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks. Ronnie Hawkins was a kind of a rockabilly guy. His backing band was called the Hawks. They later morphed into the band, R.I.P. Robbie Robertson.
Right.
But he didn't hear Ronnie Hawkins. He would say, "Where is Rocking Hawkus?" So Ronnie Hawkins became Rocking Hawkus. I don't know what a Hawkus is, but it meant something to him. And he would identify it as Rocking Hawkus. Now, he also misheard the name. And this is not recited, and it's not a song, but it is a Mondegreen. He misheard the name of the bougainvillea plant we had in our backyard. We had a couple bougainvillea vines in our backyard.
Right.
It's a beautiful but thorny ornamental vine, and it climbs along a wall. We had two of them in a wall in our backyard. But he misheard bougainvillea as Pokin William, a Pokin William plant.
Uh-huh.
Because why would he do this?
Well, that's his name.
That's his name. So rather than bougainvillea, he heard Pokin William plant, and he had been poked by
right. And if it's Pokin, I want to. Yeah, right. Okay, I'm going to steer clear.
I asked him, "Do you remember that plant?" And he said, "Yes, it poked me a couple times."
That's the Pokin William. That's
so
awesome.
he would like Pokin William plant, and it took me a while to figure out that he was calling it a Pokin William plant, and of course he stayed the hell away from it because it was a Pokin William plant. Anyway, that's kind of my little take on Mondegreens. I could have taken off and done nothing but song lyrics because I'm sure there's a ton of them. You know, I could have gone through and I used to have a little back of the toilet shaped sized books that had nothing but Mondegreens in it with little cartoon illustrations. But I know there's just a treasure trove of stuff with the Rolling Stones, particularly from Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street era Stones, where it was really murky and dark and deep, and it was very hard to
very bluesy and sort of not quite scat singing, but almost from Mick, where it's
right. Jumpin' Jack Flash. I was born in a crossfire hurricane. I was raised by a toothless bearded hag. It took me forever to figure out what he was saying and what he was talking about. And who knows that for years what I was saying. And I remember I used to misconstrue the opening bit to Mystery Science Theater 3000. They're not saying movie time, they're saying movie sign. And for years I thought they were saying movie time. When the little flashing lights would go off, it was movie sign, movie sign, movie sign. I thought I was hearing movie time, movie time, movie time. So, I think we can all fall prey to it. I highly recommend that everybody looks up that Ba Fa McGurk effect video. It's really cool. And of course, there's tons of websites out there for Mondegreens if you want to look up, or send in your own if you're interested. If there's a lyric that you misheard for years until someone corrected you. I often think of that scene from, is it Bull Durham? Young Girls Do Get Woolly, where he's singing, I think it's Tim Robbins. He says, dude, they don't get woolly. Young girls get weary. They get weary, not woolly, weary. And then fighting over the lyrics of Blinded by the Light. Revved up like a douche. Not a douche. It's a deuce. Revved up like a douche.
I was just about to mention that one. That was the only song I could think of that definitely has that. There's like an SNL bit about I think about how that's there's 4 or 5 different takes on that. Yeah.
And then I just thought this morning of one where it's within a Monty Python song where they correct themselves because someone listening to the song within the song hears a Mondegreen. And I think it's John Cleese is singing Eric the Half a Bee song. And he says, I love him semi-carnally. And then one goes, Cyril Connolly. And he says, no, semi-carnally. So the guy's hearing Cyril Connolly rather than semi-carnally. And they're correcting the Mondegreen within the song itself, which is kind of interesting. It's very, very meta on Monty Python's. Yep. And that's all I got for this week.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm surprised I've never heard the term Mondegreen before because I love this kind of stuff, as you know. And after talking about spoonerisms and all that stuff many, many weeks ago, this is definitely I find this stuff hilarious. One I may have mentioned this before. One I guess spoonerism that I loved that was definitely an improvement, that was not a Mondegreen, but a saying that was radically improved by a mistake was someone once sang a million years ago in my presence, I was so mad I was just skicking and creaming. Like, so when it's improved, it's definitely better. And to your point, I've always understood why it is that deaf people watch your mouth when you speak, because the whole ba versus fa thing, obviously that is just, if you can't hear anything at all, how it's being how those words are being presented visually is so important to understand what the hell is being said. So yeah, it's cool stuff.
Yeah, it also made me think of that scene from Best in Show where Christopher Guest is trying to teach himself ventriloquism. I went to see the front lady, the het lady. How do you do an F? It doesn't say how to do Fs in here. It's just really interesting stuff when you think about how we how that formation and how we visualize it is so important to how we understand it. Anyway, so if you have any Mondegreens that you've fallen prey to over the years, there's no shame in it. Send them in, let us know.
Yes,
because I'd love to read them out, because I know they're out there, and I know we've done them. So
yeah, several weeks ago, you were grilling me on Rush albums. I believe there's a friend of the pod who was one time making fun of one of his siblings for their bastardization of some Rush lyrics. and seeing them wrong and badly wrong for years on end. So we'll have to be reminded of that story, and we can use it down the road.
But how can you tell? It's a Russian. No, I'm just kidding.
Fuck you.
All right. Speaking of effing me, do we have a curse word of the week?
It's time for the Dream Idiots curse word of the week.
We do indeed. The curse word for week 78 of Dream Idiots is spicy pillow. Spicy pillow. Any idea what a spicy pillow is? This comes to us from Urban Dictionary. And you don't have to guess if you don't want to.
Well, I've been painting myself into a corner as the less foul mouth of the two of us, so I'm afraid to do this. I don't know.
I'll tell you, it's actually, at first glance, based on the source especially, you'd think it is nasty, filthy, medical, gross, and actually, it's not. It's actually comparatively benign, but it is still a great term that sounds like something you'd complain to your doctor about. Doc, I'm sorry, I've got a spicy pillow, but it's actually nothing. It's benign.
I'll pass. What is the spicy pillow, Bryan?
Lithium ion batteries, when they begin to fail, and obviously there's a chemical reaction going on, they get old, they're installed incorrectly. I've never seen this before. After all the electronic devices I've had over the years, some of them will apparently begin to bulge slightly, and dangerously, in fact. And so occasionally, you've heard stories about cell phones exploding in people's pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they explode because the battery in that phone is suffering a spicy pillow and is about to leave third-degree burns on your leg. But that's where a spicy pillow comes from. At first glance, it seems like it's going to be something incredibly disgusting, but it's not.
But it's still pretty horrifying.
It can be. I mean, they could, apparently this causes fires, can cause all kinds of problems. So if you have a device that has rechargeable batteries that you switch in and out, cameras, drones, any of that kind of stuff, and the thing's bulging, go get a new battery, because the thing's gonna blow up in your face and cause problems.
It's gonna be full of tarantulas, Bryan.
Oh, yeah, there you go. You start creating our own urban legends. Spicy pillow.
Okay.
All right.
Spicy pillow. Thank you for not totally grossing me out this week. I appreciate it.
I tried. I was trying to make it a little more, kid friendly, because we're rated G here at Dream Idiots.
G for gross.
So way back in, I think, week 3, we talked about the Wonderlic test. And the Wonderlic test, for those of you who don't know, is actually they've discontinued use of the Wonderlic test in the NFL. It's kind of an intelligence test, and they've stopped using it because it has been shown pretty demonstrably to be a pointless test that has all kinds of problems, including pretty severe racial biases, and doesn't really amount to much. But in keeping with making fun of things that are sort of standardized and well respected, at least in some circles, we're going to dive into something which I'm sure you've heard of before, called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Test. Have you ever actually taken this test before?
I don't know if I have or not. Is this the kind that indicates whether you're not introverted or that kind of stuff?
Yes, it's essentially. So I'll give you a kind of a quick history here, and then I'll kind of get into why it's basically bullshit, even though this is a huge company that tons of very, very big, Fortune 500 companies and large educational institutions still think has some merit. So in personality typology, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, it's MBTI, is an introspective self-reporting questionnaire. Keyword here, self-reporting questionnaire, indicating differential psychological preferences in basically how people perceive the world and how they make decisions. It's very, very popular, as I said, but the scientific community largely has kind of dismissed it as being pseudoscience, and the test attempts to assign an on-off switch, a binary value to each of 4 categories: introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. And so one letter from each of those categories is then brought together. So when you take this test, you're given a 4-letter test result, such as ENFJ, ISTJ, etc. This test is actually way older than I ever realized. It was originally the first phase of the work was done by a woman named Catherine Cook Briggs. She started working on this thing in 1917.
Good Lord.
Because over 100 years ago, because she had just met her future son-in-law, and she saw in him several differences in his personality that differed from other members of his family. And based on that kind of just sparked this interest in behavioral traits, personality traits, and sort of the psychology of this. And she then developed this typology wherein she proposed there kind of 4, broadly speaking, 4 different types of people: meditative, spontaneous, executive, and social. Over time, then, the marriage still does happen. She is joined by her daughter, Isabel Briggs Myers. And they do, they're not complete idiots. They, do a lot of reading and research. And a lot of this work is kind of based on Carl Jung's work, in certain respects. The daughter, Isabel, was fascinated on what causes someone to be introverted. Basically, she considered herself to be an INFP, but she thought that Jung's stuff was just entirely too complex, and they were trying to make this much more down to earth, user friendly, and more accessible. A lot of the research that kind of supports, even to this day, the underpinnings of the Myers-Briggs test is produced by the Center for Applications of Psychological Type, but this is an organization that's actually run by the Myers-Briggs Foundation. So, a bit of a conflict of interest there, because they're making lots of money on people spending money on this test and implementing it, in various functions in HR and to try to figure out career paths and those types of things. It's criticized because folks really look at this and see that there is scientific sort of metric deficiencies, poor validity, poor reliability. There's not like this double-blind test studies that they have in medical studies. It's not very comprehensive, and so folks who really dive into this, many of them have just kind of dismissed it. Myers graduated in 1919, 2 years after she started this work, but her degree was in political science, I believe. So they're not. She and her daughter are not masters of psychology. They're self-taught, and they're just kind of plunging ahead. And I hate to be dismissive. I'm sure these are 2 women 100 years ago. I'm sure women of this time were just completely dismissed. And I would hate to ever be dismissive. I'm not being dismissive of the fact that they're women, but I am being a little bit dismissive because that's what folks that were in this field at the time were doing, because they just didn't quite have the academic chops to kind of justify this work. Nevertheless, they plunge ahead. World War II comes around, and they became convinced and managed to convince those in the military that having this type of testing is going to be incredibly important, because having some insight into personality preferences is going to help women entering the job force. We talked about this when I was yakking about Rosie the Riveter all those weeks ago. You had millions of women going into these industrial jobs, and they became, there was a general sense that having this type of test was a way to determine where women would be the most comfortable and most effective part of a cog in the military machine. This work does get some legitimate academic attention. They've got folks at UC Berkeley, Michigan State, Auburn University, University of Florida. I don't really want to rely on universities in Alabama and Florida to give me credibility, but whatever. Do write some, do some research and write some pieces that are supporting this work, and kind of from the 50s even to the 70s. Based on the research, kind of seems like the Myers-Briggs kind of had its heyday. Most of the rest of the story I'm gonna talk from is a Vice.com article, the title of which is "Why Myers-Briggs is Bullshit," and because it just they're very dismissive of it. So this article talks about the fact that the Myers-Briggs is it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous, it's kind of pop psychology. And all these businesses are making fun of these businesses that use Myers-Briggs to make hiring decisions, and there are all kinds of groups now that use. I'm sure I didn't do this. I should have. Go on. I haven't been on Meetup.com in a million years, but you can go on and find San Antonio INFJs or Denver, blah, whatever, in order to find more people that have your Myers-Briggs type. I'm not sure whether I'm sure it's the research indicates people put this on like their dating profiles. I don't know whether if you're an ENFJ, whether you're supposed to seek out other ENFJs or whether there's a certain, I don't know. I didn't see that in my research, but apparently,
man, it's like a Scorpio dating a Scorpio, man.
Right. Well, we'll come to that in a second. You're spot on. But this stuff is
step on a spider, man. You don't step on a spider. It's bad karma, man.
So all this stuff seems to have gained traction because it kind of fosters this impression when you've taken this test that not only, I'm not nobody. I'm special. I'm an ENFJ. It's kind of this labeling that people take some, I don't know, weirdly some self-esteem from it. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, it makes you part of a tribe, right? It makes you part of a team,
yeah,
a tribe, a group.
Yeah, right. There's a guy named Ronald Reggio, who is a PhD in psychology at UC Riverside. He teaches currently at Claremont McKenna. He says, quote, "The research out there that says Myers-Briggs doesn't predict behavior in a consistent way and psychometrically, the way it's constructed is pretty odd." He went on, "My first encounter with the scale was when a student presented it to me, and since it was so poorly constructed, I thought it was the student's work." Zing. That's an academic takedown. Another expert, a guy named Robert Hogan, made fun of Myers-Briggs, calling it, quote, "little more than a Chinese fortune cookie." And there's all kinds of other takedowns of this approach that basically mock it for saying, if there are 4 letters and you have 4 choices, okay, that breaks you down to 16 different unique categories in which all of humanity can be placed, and that is little more, it's certainly more complex than racism is, and the nasty comments people say about all black people are blank, all Asian people are blank. It's okay, so it's 16 times more complex than that, but that doesn't mean it's accurate or has much merit.
So it's the academic equivalent of, well, bless your heart.
Right.
Look at what you've done.
So the main complaint with it is that it has to do with how it sort of measures cognition. Because Myers-Briggs works in binaries, you're either judging or perceiving. You're not both. You're either intuitive or sensing. You're not both. And so it's just not. But the test is just not complex enough, nuanced enough, and there's no room in this thing for black and white. Right. It's just, it has to be, it's just
not even a Likert scale, huh? Not even
It's just
Okay.
too
All right.
it's just too simple, and unfortunately, most people fall somewhere in the middle. That's kind of that's sort of that's where the underpinnings of the test begin to fail. You're either introverted or you're extroverted, and it's all this true false on off, left right thing. Reacher kind of makes fun of Carl Jung. It's not even worth talking about in much detail, but according to Reggio, Carl Jung wasn't a data guy. He wasn't an empiricist. And so much of this work is sort of an assumption based on an assumption based on an assumption. And sort of, and so if you're a believer in Myers-Briggs, it's about as worthwhile as being a meteorologist, because it's just so, tenuous.
A meteorologist.
And exactly so. But the reason why Reggio thinks it's so popular is because the Myers-Briggs, the results that you get have this sort of soft focus, loving, light, horoscopy approach to their descriptions. And so there isn't a single scrap of negativity in it. Everything is composed positively. And so the Myers-Briggs test is never going to tell you that you're a bad person or that you failed the test. It's always sort of infused with warm fuzzies and merit. Reggio goes on to say, quote, when you read the basic descriptions, they're all written in a positive way. Psychologists call that the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect says that if you write something that's so general, it can apply to anyone, that they all sound right, they're all so positive and kind of generic, people say, oh my God, this is a miracle. It totally applies to me, unquote.
Right. It doesn't take the time to say like things like you have a difficulty accepting criticism. You have
Right.
because of this, you have problems following orders. You have difficulty cooperating with others, that kind of stuff. It's all
right. Yeah, exactly. And some of that
levered towards the good, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and so when there's no way to manufacture the insult, when it's impossible to take it negatively, it seems true. If someone says you're pretty, you're inclined to believe them, whether you right, because and so that must be true. Again, even now there are some academics. There's a guy named John Johnson who has a terrible name, but he's a psychologist at Penn State. Again, he agrees that the test fails to envelop the full complexity of the human psyche. It's much more of a spectrum. But he says, quote, when it comes to making a decision based on personality scores, that decision is almost always binary or categorical. So if you have someone with strong personality traits, A, B, and C, some of that, if you're a person who is willing to defend their position, if you are someone who has enough confidence to not concern yourself with criticism from others, as you were just saying, some of that might have some merit, especially if you're dealing with issues tied to leadership, high level decision making, and those types of things. So there might be some merit there, but as a general rule, again, Johnson, does acknowledge he's an outlier. And most folks think this is all bunk. He thinks there's some merit to it, and he's sort of fighting for the right of lay people to enjoy this as a process, as a diagnosis, without feeling stupid. Even though most academics are completely dismissing it. He goes on to say the controversies between academic psychologists on the one hand, on the other hand, practitioners in other fields who use Myers-Briggs for workshops, as well as people who take Myers-Briggs and find value in it just for fun. And then that first expert I mentioned, Reggio, concedes the point, quote, if people do some research, I think it's fine for self-exploration. If people get hooked on psychology, that's a positive side effect. So there's no danger in taking your Myers-Briggs test as long as you don't get crazy ass invested in the results. I think the comparison, astrology, tarot cards, going to see a psychic, it kind of is, in my view, it's way more in that category than in the hard science. I actually know someone who was struggling with sort of career issues and trying to figure out what it was that she wanted to do next. And she did a much more in-depth test, but she did something that was, Myers-Briggs on steroids, and it told her definitively that you need to pursue a career in dentistry, and she did. She became a dentist, and she was had her own practice, and a few years after that got married and started having kids. So I'm not sure whether that counts as a success or not, but I can't quite imagine just passing the authority of that sort of life decision to a test. But nevertheless, she did it.
Huh.
So this is the Wonderlic test is utter crap. Myers-Briggs is utter crap. You can add tarot cards are utter crap. Astrology is utter crap. We did this. This could be a podcast by itself. Utter crap with Morris and Bryan.
Well, I mean, if you want to take it as a first step to exploring your psyche, to learning more about yourself,
yeah,
that's fine. As long as you don't take it further than that and start, because you have to, every time you find a strength, you're going to find a weakness that undercuts that argument, right? I mean, that's
right.
The nature of having strengths. It's not like you're all solid strengths. That means that somewhere along the line, I've been told that I like to let people get along. I'm a peacemaker, man. I just want everybody to get along, which means it's hard for me to tell people no.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's the payoff. It's hard for me to make difficult decisions when it comes time for, one person can have this job, not two.
Right.
That kind of thing. I took a similar test for when I realized that I didn't want to go back to teaching in academics. I took a similar test that was, what do you want to do? And it was the most frustrating experience I think I've ever had. I mean, it was just,
uh-huh.
I don't want to say it was a waste, but it certainly felt wasteful by the time I was done. It was like, I know everything that you've suggested to me. And the guy was even saying, I don't know what to tell you. And I was like, well, can I have my money back? This is
all right. Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. I mean, when I started this topic, the first things that in the description it says about this test is that it's self-reporting. I mean, I was going to advocate, if it's okay with you, that you and I could take the same test. There are tons of versions of this online. If you want to take the official one through the Myers-Briggs whatever institute, it costs $50. I'm not giving those fuckers a dime. But there are a whole bunch of different free versions which we could take just for fun and report on those results
sure.
Next week.
Let's decide on one so we take the same one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So we can come back and then see. But it seems like I mean, it's either because everything is phrased so positively that it's almost impossible for it to not seem true. I'll be curious to see how we respond to it now that at least now that I have a somewhat more cynical view of it, because when I took it before, and I recall what I was before. I've taken it twice, and I was the same thing both times. I recall reading the summary and thinking, "Yep, wow, that is spot on." And now I feel stupid for having sort of fallen for it. So now with this fresh perspective, I'm curious to see how it will seem.
I kind of want to go back and see if anybody like Jim Jones or John Wayne Gacy ever took it and what they they scored on it. Why, yes, I am social. I love to bury people in my basement.
Yeah, I mean the questions are they're not really they're all statements. You regularly make new friends. Agree, disagree. You spend a lot of your free time exploring various random topics that pique your interest. Seeing other people cry can easily make you feel like you want to cry too. You often make a backup plan for your backup plan. And so there's a spectrum of agree to disagree, strongly or mildly.
When you bury a body, you use plenty of quicklime.
Right. You always stand when you pee. Right.
Well, I with a tendency of me to make things too dark too quickly. Yeah, let's figure out which one to take, or if you know which one you want to take, just let me know which one you took, and I'll I'll take it and report it. So yeah, let's do that for next time. That'll be our update at the beginning of the episode. We can start with that because that'd be pretty funny.
Summary said Myers-Briggs says that Bryan is a high-functioning sociopath. Wait, what?
Well, it's better than being a low-functioning sociopath.
Right.
So.
Right.
Well, no, because they'd eventually catch a low-functioning sociopath, right?
Right.
So turns out that Bryan just has the heart of a small boy, which he keeps in the back of his closet, to paraphrase Stephen King. Yeah. All right. Well, that was an interesting, abrupt change of topics halfway through.
Nice little combination of things. And I am, in keeping with my utter crap, I'm gonna do a slight teaser next week on Dream Idiots. Why alpha males are utter crap. That's I'm teasing my story for next week.
Oh, that's cool. I'm not. I'll
Okay.
keep mine a secret. But
Fine.
as always, we give these invitations out and just assume that this is something that listeners you can do. If you have experience with a Myers-Briggs, or if it's changed your life in a positive way, let us know. And send in Mondegreens as well if there's something that you've heard. Anytime we do stuff like this, feel free to share with us, because we want to hear from others. And if you think Myers-Briggs is crap, let us know. Or if it's the reason that you are
in your chosen field,
in your chosen field and happy as a clam, let us know. Seriously.
Other information is available. It's entirely possible that we are wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just thinking, if you, what are the odds of? I mean, you could, not terribly bad that you could flip a coin every time and get the same results if you had actually taken the damn test too. It's just 16 categories, right? So
just 16 categories. And
yeah,
I guess it sort of depends how. I mean, if you have like, huge dramatic life change, even so, it's based on what I was reading about it. It seems like most people are not surprised with the results. So are they not surprised with the results because it's self-reporting? Or are they not surprised with the results because everything is phrased in this unicorn puffy cloud, phraseology, that it all feels like a compliment, right? So it's all going to be true, right? Then you're skinny and pretty, and all the boys like you. Like what? Right? So I don't know. I can't tell which one it is, but we'll knock out a test between this week and next, and see how we feel.
Well, it's not going to be like a Charlie Brown Halloween where all the kids get candy except for one who gets a rock every time, right? I mean, everybody's going to get candy. So,
right.
All right. Well,
cool. That's it for another week, folks. Thanks a lot. We appreciate you listening and liking and subscribing and sharing. If you don't mind, go on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Podchaser or Amazon or wherever you're listening, and shoot us 5 stars and a review. That would be fabulous. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram at Dream Idiots, and drop us a line, dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com. We'd appreciate it, and thanks for tuning in.
Go listen to your favorite album and see if what they're saying is actually what you're hearing, and be good to each other. Thanks.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong. Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.